uh, everybody, welcome to the MCI monthly webinar. We're very happy and lucky to have Debbie Battat with us here. I will, of course, introduce her in a second and the topic. Also happy to have Hannah Hausch, the COO of MCI, and Mia Friedman, the coordinator of MCI. Thank you for coming. If there is anybody else from MCI, I can't see it because the screen is small, then welcome as well. So as you all know, and thank you very much for joining us. Who is here all? Who else? Who else?
Ariel.
Ariel is here. Ariel, welcome. This is your first monthly webinar?
The first one.
Okay, so Ariel, who recently joined us as the CEO of MCI, is here, so I'm very happy too. You just need
Happy
the
to be
MCI
here.
background, Ariel, so we can recognize you. So anyway, so we have a long tradition of monthly webinars, and the objective of the webinar is to provide our community with practical tools of things that are really important to commercialization of medical device and digital health in different territories, but a lot of the territories behave in a similar fashion with focus in the US. And in the end of the day, as you all know, it's critical for us that this webinar will be very practical. Means you will have, in the end of the day, you'll have a very organized way of thinking about a topic. And the topic of today, which is, I think, one of the most, if not the most important in our world, is the professional education element of commercializing medical device. And a lot of time when people think professional education, they think kind of product training, but this topic is way broader. It's actually the best way to expose the community to the science and the outcome and the right way of working with your products, wherever, whatever your product is. And more importantly, it's the opportunity, and Debbie will talk a lot about it, not for the company to tell the doctors, physician users, but also to tell, to have other KOLs, peers, telling your community of, the importance of your products. It's attracting the right audience, and it's really the way of promoting your product in a very smart way. And there is a lot of caveats and rules, which Debbie will share. So with that, I'm really pleasant to have Debbie with us today. Debbie is a J&J colleague for, I think she was 14 years with J&J and headed the professional education function at multiple operating company at J&J. So with no further ado, Debbie, I'm sure you'll introduce yourself in a more detailed fashion. The platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Gilad, and thank you to MCI for this invitation. I'm really honored and happy to share with you my experience in professional education because it has opened so many doors for me, and I've had the opportunity to partner with some of the most wonderful and accomplished doctors and healthcare practitioners around the world. And at the end of the day, you really know and feel that you've done something to move the needle in healthcare and advance medicine. And it's a really fulfilling feeling. And also on top of that, it's a great driver of commercial success. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Actually, a lot about that. So just a moment. Okay, so just briefly about me. As Gilad said, most of my adult career was in Johnson & Johnson in many different geographies, emerging markets, developed markets, several different business units, both legacy and new acquisitions for the company. After some time, I also had the entrepreneurial bug, and I was the founder of Surge, which was a digital health ed tech platform where doctors and practitioners could get their continued medical education points online. And the goal was to become something like Coursera or masterclass.com for the medical world. And it was acquired after 2 years by one of our partner institutions. And since then, I've been working with healthcare companies on clinical education, business development, and my foundational career was in private equity and on US capital. So in general, I do understand, for those of you who are founders, I really do understand the path that you're on. And I've tried to make this presentation, by putting myself in your shoes and thinking about what is the most important thing. This is just a brief, some of the classes and courses that we did from Surge when I had my company. So, as Gilad said, the most important thing is that you're going to have the tools to do professional education in the right way. I want this to be very practical, and you'll know afterwards what you're going to do, how much you need to spend, and what is the outcome that you can expect. So instead of me telling you about it, I'm going to follow 3 different characters in very different stages of the company, of maturity of the company, maturity of the product. We have Bob, Maya, and Frederick. So Bob is the chief business officer of a small VC. They're in their Series A. They've had some great milestones accomplished. Possibly they've submitted for proprietorship. They maybe have some trials done. And what he's trying to do is to change the treatment of complications in the GI tract by using a new navigation system for the GI procedure. Okay, this is made up, but what's important to understand is what phase of the company is and how he's going to approach his professional education. So what he's most thinking about is, number one, nobody knows the brand. Okay, so he's got to fight for the brand awareness. He has to introduce a completely new technology, maybe not having the backing and all of the resources. He requires new reimbursement approval, and he requires, of course, a complete change in the shift of the mentality of the practitioners who are treating the GI tract. So he really has his work cut out for him. And on top of that, he's got very limited resources and he's got a small team. Okay, so his educational needs are really about most importantly, developing his family of key opinion leaders who are going to advocate for the product, who are going to help him influence the policy to get reimbursement, to show that this is an easy product to use, and of course, to train people and make sure that the early results are outstanding, because the early outstanding results are very, very important when you have a new product. Now we have Maya. She's the VP of marketing in a mid-sized company, no longer really a startup. It's quite established. They've got FDA, they've got maybe, they have CE, they have some good clinical outcomes. And she has an existing product that's being launched, but with some great new features and benefits, right? So what this is a new implant system for trauma and orthopedics. It has a new special coating, a proprietary coating that has a patent. And what's special about this is, let's say it enhances the integration with the bone, surrounding tissues, and allows for deeper flexion and faster return to activity. So she has some very clear benefits on this particular product. It's an existing procedure, but it's a great improvement on the previous implant. So her particular challenges are, well, actually, this is a much more expensive product, right? So she has to prove that the higher price point is going to be worthwhile, and that in the long run, it's going to reduce the complications. There is a high learning curve, so she does have to ensure that the doctors using it and the nurses that are supporting them understand the new instrument system. And she has to introduce a new product within an existing technology. So her needs are really about demonstrating the clinical benefits and really being clear about her clinical messages by showing evidence-based claims, comparative data versus traditional implants. We'll talk about what that is later, and reducing the learning curve for the right stakeholders, and of course, improving the confidence about why that product is higher priced. And finally, we have Frederick. Frederick is working in a multinational corporate. He's the global business unit lead for a legacy product. It's a heritage product, cardiac monitoring device that detects arrhythmia. It does have some incremental innovations and here and there some new features that are worthwhile, but mostly he's focusing on heritage and strong clinical results. And what he wants to do is expand the global footprint in new geographies or markets that have a low penetration, and make sure that this is considered the gold standard. So he has to reinforce the company's existing reputation, maintain the market leadership, grow market share where he can, And he's going to do this by working on things like trust, brand value, the legacy that he already has, and being very close with the key opinion leaders and clinical stakeholders. So I think it's important to say that although professional education is here to improve the outcomes for the patients, at the end of the day, we have to always remember we're running a business and we want the business to do well. So there are, as you know, 3 ways to expand our business. First of all, we can, of course, increase market share. So taking it from the competitors in the space, we can expand the market. Okay, so make the pie bigger for all of the companies. Or in a rare occasion, we can actually create the market when we have something groundbreaking. So how does that work when it comes to professional education strategy and commercial development? Because the educational approach is different for each pocket that we take. What you're going to do and where you're going to invest is very different. So first, we can introduce new innovation, completely new technology. We then may have enhancements and upgrades, improvements on an existing technology that shows new benefits. We can expand the adoption or accessibility to that product by scaling to new geographies and specialties, increasing the procedural adoption. Or, and what we must all be doing at every stage of our journey, is to ensure safe and effective use. I can't stress this enough that this is our North Star of education, because good, safe, effective use means good clinical outcomes, and good clinical outcomes will be the driver of your business and of the trust with your partners. So where do our friends, Bob, Maya, and Frederick fit in? Well, Bob, we remember he's got something brand new. Maya is working on an enhancement and an upgrade, and she's also working on enhancing the adoption. And Frederick is in expanding adoption and accessibility. And as we said, everybody's focused on the safe and effective use. Now,
Debbie,
I'm not going to spend, yes?
I'm going to stop you for just a second. And I forgot to say it in the beginning. If anybody in the crowd has questions, we're welcoming questions. The way to do it is to type them in the chat function of the Zoom. And the MCI team here will monitor and moderate the question with Debbie. So that will be the right way to do it without interference. Thank you, Debbie. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So there's another important piece, and it's about the KOL and stakeholder segmentation. Now, there's a wonderful webinar that Gilad has already done. It's on their platform. If you haven't seen it, definitely see it. Who you invest in, especially in the early stages of the company, is one of the most important decisions that you make, because every penny, every shekel counts towards, you need to see a return on what you're doing, especially in the early stages. So review these KOL categories very clearly, but I'm just going to run through them very quickly. Basically, you have clinical and non-clinical KOLs and stakeholders. The clinical KOLs are those who have a direct contact with the technology, product, and patient. And I'm just going to make it easy for you. I generally see them, the top KOLs, in 2 different categories. These are the ones that I go for first if I'm starting a new business or I have a certain goal. So first of all, you have those who are maybe more established in their medical career. They've had a great practice, and now they're really involved in publishing. They're on stages in all of the conferences. They're well known as educators and visionaries, and they're the ones that every company wants to work with. And they're very, very important. But I'll tell you what, they're not usually the ones, not always the ones, who are doing a lot of volume, right? The volume ones, those are typically, not always, but typically a little bit younger, in that they're still establishing their practice. They are the workhorses. They are the ones that are going to get getting a lot of volume with the product and the technology. So both of them are very, very important to be collaborating with. And the ones, in my experience, that I most worked with, it's those influencers, visionaries, and then the volume leaders. Now, you also have educators who can be local educators, up-and-coming key opinion leaders, and of course, nurses and technicians, because depending on your specialty, they actually might be your primary stakeholder. Then we have the non-clinical KOLs, and these are people who influence the policy, market access, and this really differs from country to country. You have in the States, for example, private insurers who are really key decision makers, but across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, it might be the Ministry of Health, and then you're working with different stakeholders in a different way for each different country. So it's important that you understand the local rules and who's making the decisions about reimbursement. And usually I've been working with hospital administration, very important for them to understand our pricing and of course, health economists. And this is evidence-based medicine, which basically shows, for example, hey, the product is more expensive, but we have some clinical evidence that shows that over, let's say, 10 years, the hospital is going to be spending much less. So the health economists are those that help you to prove cost effectiveness and value over time. And then those messages you can use to talk with the hospital administration. I put the patient advocates as people I've worked with, but I think in the early stages, depending on what field you are in, they're not the first go-to segment because it's usually the doctor who's making, or the practitioner who's making the decisions on what the patient uses. So I think that they can be worked with for sure down the line. Okay, I'm going to get into each of the different types of professional education. The ones in purple are the ones that I'm going to spend a little more time on because these are the ones that bring more value. Okay, by the way, any questions until now that I can answer? Is everything clear? Okay, great. So one of the most important things I believe that you can do in the beginning of the journey, especially when you're launching a new product, a new procedure, something that is completely out of left field, it's advisory boards. Now, advisory boards are very easy to create when you already have a strong brand, or if you're in a corporation that has a legacy and many years of clinical outcomes. But when you're just trying to make your name in a field and you're trying to enter something new, getting those key opinion leaders on board can be a long journey. It can take a year, it can take more, it might take less. But what is the importance of this? So basically, you are investing in a group of key opinion leaders, maybe 6, 8, 10. These need to be the top people in the field that can help you to advocate for your technology. And they're going to give you feedback and guidance on certain strategic initiatives. For example, what should the training approach be? What potential barriers to adoption might be in the future? What is the reimbursement policy and what can be done about it? Any clinical data and how to translate that clinical data into messages for the audience. So your advisory board is going to consult with you and guide you to create a solid strategy for the future. So it needs to be picked really, really carefully. And for this, I believe that it's best to use for introducing new innovations to help shape the strategy for future accessibility, maybe identify early adopter sites, and also to ensure safe and effective use. A little bit about the cost. This is definitely one of the more costly endeavors that you're going to do. And this is a place that you don't want to cut corners. In that you're going to want to hire the most relevant and the best KOLs that you can get. And because each one of them is doing a service for you, you need to pay a consultant fee to each person. I'm going to talk a little bit later at the end about how to evaluate what the consulting fees are and how to analyze that. But with hospitality and flights, you're looking at a budget of between 20 to 50,000 per session. There are definitely more inexpensive ways to do that. For example, you can connect it to an existing congress or conference where they will be, and then you reduce some of the hospitality charges. But it is an investment. And the ROI should really be that there are better accessibility in the future, a faster learning curve, and faster adoption rate and expansion. So for this, I said, okay, I think Bob is the best person to launch an advisory board. And the case study can go something like this. And I'm happy to share this afterwards so that you can see what an agenda might look like. So his objective was to validate the clinical message, training strategy, and reimbursement pathway for this new endoscopy. And he targeted high volume endoscopist decision makers and even some people who were payer and insurance experts. So a sample agenda might look at understanding what are the pain points that currently exist in that disease state and in that specialty, in that medical specialty, how a demo of the product and how it can be integrated into the existing workflow of the practitioner, cost justification, training strategy for the future, and then an action plan. So he spent all in all $40,000, fair amount, but that's going to be one of his key activities for the year. And he took a long time to identify who are going to be the right KOLs, and he made those relationships with them over time. And he expects to receive strong market position and accelerated adoption. Very, very important. If you are going to have an advisory board, you need to follow up with them and engage them, especially during the next months, the next 2, 3, 4 months that follow, so that they know that, first of all, you're a serious company, but that their advice has gone to something that is working. A little bit different from the advisory board is the roundtable. And the roundtable can be used instead of guiding the strategy of a company, this can be used more to learn and share knowledge with top volume users and one KOL moderator. This is definitely a more cost-effective solution because you're not paying consultant doctors for their time. You're more giving them the opportunity to learn from one another in a case-based discussion. So this is better for technologies that are a little bit more mature, that have already some entrance in the market, some usage statistics and some case studies, and not for brand new technology. And for this, I would say, depending on if you will be covering flights and so forth, it can cost from 10 to 30,000 per session. And I expect to see from this improved procedural volume and sales conversion and new KOLs as well. So for this, we brought Maya in, and Maya, as you remember, her technology is a new innovation on an existing product. So what she wants to do is target the high volume trauma and sports medicine surgeons and really have a moderator that is one absolute KOL influencer. So a sample agenda might look like this: to welcome them to the new innovation, to talk about pain points again with the existing solutions, and spend a lot of time on the early use cases and any training needs and concerns and potential complications that might come up and how to avoid them. She spent just under 20,000, and she expects to see a refined training approach, higher surgeon confidence, which is something that you can measure, by the way, by surveys, and a stronger sales strategy. Conferences and industry events. This is one topic that, or one initiative that I have always been on the fence about. And the reason is that it's very difficult to prove a good ROI, especially if you are actually at any stage company that you are. But that's the one thing. On the one hand, it's difficult to measure it. But on the other hand, if you're not there, the lack of your presence is felt in the market as well. So it's a very tricky one, and they can be very, very expensive. If you are a corporate sponsor and with the gold or platinum, it's much easier to get the brand exposure that you're looking for. But if you're just starting and you're doing a small sponsorship and you're somewhere on the side, it can be tough, but it's still a great opportunity to network with really top KOLs and influential decision makers. So the benefit of this is obviously to get showcase the technology in a huge recognized forum. Depending on the level of your sponsorship, you can have symposia, educational sessions, live demos. You can have a hands-on training, live workshops. You can participate with a KOL in a panel discussion. Even sometimes as a CEO of a company, you can also be invited to a panel discussion on stage. And that's a very powerful opportunity. You can have a live streaming of a procedure, though I really don't recommend live streamings because usually these things go wrong as per Murphy's Law. But the goal of this is to definitely expand adoption, and you can also use it to introduce new innovation. The purpose is to expand brand awareness, definitely generate leads, and network with key industry figures. So the costs are really high, depending on if it's an international or a local regional conference. It can go from 30 to 250,000, maybe even more, depending on what specialty you're in. And local and regional conferences are much lower. Plus, you need to pay for the travel and consulting fee of a KOL if it's applicable. And you really need to measure this and work hard and make sure that your whole team is working hard to generate new leads and that they're making the most of this event. So you can measure this by number of leads generated, number of practitioners who've committed to a trial, and brand awareness. And this was a great event for Frederick, who already has an established technology, but he wants to expand into new regions and make sure that it is known as the gold standard for this particular technology. So he spent close to 300,000, but he got a great ROI. There were over 5,000 cardiologists at the event. They spent significant time with key decision makers, over 10. They got over 100 leads, and they're planning on 10% conversion, and they believe that there will be an impact on reimbursement as well. And what you can see is that they took advantage of everything that there is to have a panel KOL leader to speak about the product in front of the audience, of course, a booth. They did a live broadcast. They did a hands-on workshop during the event to do a live demonstration, which I think are the most useful of all the initiatives that you can do at a Congress, but it is expensive. So this is probably my favorite of all of the professional education initiatives. And the reason for that is because the preceptorship, proctorship, or roadshow, this is a small group, intimate environment where doctors have an opportunity to physically test and try the product under the guidance and being monitored by usually a top key opinion leader whom they very much respect. So I believe that the ROI on this can be phenomenal, and I think it's a game changer. So this is preceptorships, the difference between these. So a preceptorship is when a key opinion leader has, let's say, a center of excellence or a place that he operates or she operates, and the students, the doctors, come and visit the center and they get to try a few cases themselves. Proctorship and roadshow is where the key opinion leader travels to the hospital or clinic or wherever the procedure is being done. He or she is monitoring the practitioner for their first few cases, making sure that they're doing it correctly. And then they have much more confidence in the use, and then they can do it on their own. So it's really a way to ensure two things. Number one, that the early cases are done properly. And number two, that even if people have a little bit more experience, they can ask all kinds of questions because it's an intimate environment. What are the complications? How can I avoid risks? Things like that are very, very important that need to be talked about between doctor to doctor or practitioner to practitioner. So this is great for any stage company that you're in, especially if you're introducing new innovation, but not only. It's great for all stages and ultimately to ensure safe and effective use. Now, the cost is highly variable, so I didn't actually write it on here. We'll get there in a minute. But the ROI is that we expect to see improved clinical outcomes. And this is something also that you as a company can measure after 1 year to see how many cases that they've done and what have been the outcomes after the cases with a certain period of time. So for this, Bob took advantage of this, and he had new users complete 5 supervised cases before they did their own independent use. And he targeted high volume centers with top or future KOLs, people that can be future advocates of the product. I always think that it's best to split this into 2 days. So the first day, everybody arrives. Then you have a 3-hour session after lunch. you talk about the procedure, the relevant anatomy for that particular procedure, the technology, and then you have a dinner. And then the next day, you do a full day of live cases. Now, it's just important for you to note, by the way, that whenever you have live patient cases, you need to check the insurance policy in that particular country. And what is the policy about other people who don't work in that hospital doing certain procedures or scrubbing in. Sometimes it's allowed, sometimes it's not, but you really, really need to check. And usually doctors have their own, practitioners have their own insurance that covers for them, but you need to check again. So he had in his ROI, okay, I want 70% of these trained physicians, they need to adopt within 6 months. So he has that target. And because it's a benefit of his product to have reduced procedure time, he said, I want to measure and make sure that there's reduced procedure time and I can use that as a benefit of the product. Okay. Now, another one which I also really like, but it can be very, very costly, sadly, it's the cadaver lab. Now, this is great, particularly for younger doctors who may or may not have the confidence to use certain products or do certain procedures yet on their own. It's not generally for very experienced users, but sometimes I found myself seeing very experienced users at a cadaver lab. Doctors always want to hear again and again the messages, and they love education at every stage. So cadaver labs have always been very popular with many levels, but again, I think it's great for the younger physician with less experience. And the goal is really to drive adoption with early users, beginners. You're typically going to have this at a certified medical training facility that is allowed to have a cadaver course. You can use a real fresh cadaver, or you can use a synthetic cadaver, which is actually what there is in the picture now. And this is generally a small group, also very intimate environment. You can have many people, but they will rotate around because you can't have too many people around the cadaver. There's just no space. But this really does improve procedural confidence. And this also has the objective for every different category that we see for professional education, for even introducing new innovation or on safe and effective use, everything that we discussed. What we find is that this is also very expensive. It can be anywhere from 60,000 to 250,000. That being said, there are certain places, geographical locations that are much cheaper and have a highly professional service. So it just depends on where you plan to go. But very important is the key opinion leader who is leading this. Maybe you need 3 or 4 for each different table. They really need to be people who can explain the technique and the procedure very clearly and have a passion for education.
Debbie, there is an interesting comment which I can relate to from Alex Nuzov here about tech suites.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen the comment and talked about it?
About what? Sorry?
Tech suites. You're familiar with the concept of tech suites? Otherwise, I can have Alex quickly introduce it, because I think it's a really good point. Alex, you want to quickly talk about it?
Sure. Sure. Thanks, Gilad. Tech suites are the suites that are usually companies set up at the big conferences where they can introduce technology that is they're working on, not necessarily approved, primarily non-approved technology, but something that they can preview physicians and get some feedback and also get some excitement about what's coming. Would it be right?
So,
Gilad?
yeah, so we use Debbie. I think that's in the context of if you have a product that was submitted to the FDA, but was not cleared or approved. One way to get feedback about the product and get the KOLs to start thinking about it is to have them under NDA. It's very important, under the confidential agreement with all the right disclosures. Come to a closed section of the booth or a room in the hotel that is used for exhibitions. Explain to them the concept of the product, get their feedback, get them to be familiar with the product, socialize with them about the product, the way to go to market about the product. So it's kind of early introduction in a very smart way. It's not a promotion. You're not allowed to discuss pricing, for example. And of course, you have to disclose that it's not a cleared or approved product, but you can definitely start the seeding process of the product with the KOL community. So I think that's a very important thought process. We use it a lot, at least in prior life. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for mentioning that. That's really useful. Thank you. Do you want to add anything else about that or on any other point? Okay.
No,
And feel
no other
free
comments
if
at this point. Yeah.
if anything while I'm speaking comes up, I'm happy to make this interactive. And if something comes to your mind that you've done that maybe hasn't or isn't covered in here, so it will be great if you can share it with the team as well. Okay. For the cadaver course case study, we chose Maya again because she's trying to drive adoption within existing centers. So centers that are already using it, but maybe not enough, not as much as they can be. For example, high volume orthopedic and trauma centers that started using the product and they understand to a certain extent the technique, but they don't have a lot of confidence with it. And this cost her almost 70,000, and she expects to see a 30% increase in existing accounts. So she was very careful to target existing accounts with a high volume. And the last one of, let's say, the most commonly used or the areas, it's virtual training and web-based learning. And I think that during the pandemic, digital learning became obviously, for obvious reasons, very, very popular. And I have definitely seen the popularity of this waning because you just miss the face-to-face interaction. Now, there are many types of surgical simulations, AI technology that's being used. The return on that or I think it really depends on if you are using different types of like robotic surgical training. The effects of that are still yet to be known. I've seen hospitals invest in computer-assisted training devices, and they just end up gathering dust in the corner. So I've really noticed that at the end of the day, there's no substitute for face-to-face training. It seems to be the one thing that people want the most because they can also share their pain. They can share their complications. They can share stuff that you don't really share on a webinar. Most people don't. They're not going to talk about their worst cases unless they feel very comfortable or they're confident. Nonetheless, I think it's a very good way of, in a cost-effective manner, scaling your brand awareness. And you can also have live streaming of a procedure, again, not recommended, but it always should include some kind of a video recording of the technique. Can be interactive or not. And depending on how you want to position the event, it can be something like an exclusive masterclass by invite only, or it can be a large-scale webinar. So again, this is a great cost-effective way to expand adoption to new markets, new geographies, and just get more awareness for your brand footprint. These can be very inexpensive. They can cost, of course, they can cost more than 4,000, but you're looking at the KOL fees and the web platform can be between 500 and generally 4,000. It shouldn't be that much more. So for this, we chose Frederick, and his goal was to drive adoption and expansion by casting a wide net, as wide as possible, and looking for community and hospital-based cardiologists, early to mid-career, generally not experts and KOLs who attend this kind of thing. He invested 7,000 and he had over 200 attendees. And in general, the agenda looks something like this: the need and the evolution of the procedure, the clinical benefits and the case studies, and of course, a KOL, a Q&A with a KOL. Just as an FYI, the statistics generally show that 20 to 30% of those who register do not attend. So it's always something to keep in mind. I'm going to say yes.
Oh, okay. Just letting you know that we have 5 minutes left, and also there's a question from Ian. You want to finish this slide and then we can read it, or?
Yeah, okay. I'll tell you what, I think just a few more slides.
Okay, perfect.
So maybe I'll finish the presentation, then we can take all the questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Now, I'm going to say that internal company training, I think it's the most important thing that you will do. If you have no money or no budget, rather, this is the one thing that's most important. Everybody in the company, commercial or non-commercial, should understand the DNA of what you're selling should be enthusiastic about what you're selling. And they need to be able to have a professional discussion with the healthcare provider. They need first very much to understand what is the USP or the unique selling proposition, what are the clinical benefits, and what does the competitive landscape look like. And I highly advise that for any new employee that they undergo a very well-planned onboarding process. It is an investment in the beginning, especially then when you probably just want to hire somebody and get them in the field as fast as possible. But they need to be absolutely professional because this is the face of your company. And this investment is one that definitely pays off in increased sales. So finally, this is all of them should be participating in this. This is what it could look like. Company history, relevant anatomy, disease state, product technology, outcomes, clinical outcomes, a SWOT analysis, and of course, a test at the end. I'm not the last one to train the trainers, centers of excellence, and certification. I'll just say something about this one and the lack of time. Certification and accreditation programs are done by third party, usually hospitals, institutions, and sometimes private doctors or clinics. I typically do not suggest these because you do not have control over the content, and they may be demonstrating a competitive technology. They tend to be very, very expensive. And aside from helping you to develop a relationship with the institution, I don't always see the short-term ROI. So I'm going to just say that about these programs. So finally, after all of this, how much did they spend? So Bob spent $75K, Maya spent just over 85, and Frederick spent 303. And in general, the ROI expected for marketing activities is 4 times what we spend. Last words about compliance. How do you understand what you should pay as a consulting fee? This is one of the most important things that you can, one of the most important legal exercises that you can do. There are some calculators online, something called Eucomed, and then there are other calculators as well. I believe that you need to pay for them. I haven't found yet a free one. However, what it does is it takes the country that the doctor is located in, the field that he or she is in, the number of years of experience, and because also, by the way, a plastic surgeon is going to get a different amount than a general surgeon or a nurse technician. So it then compiles all of that and it spits out for you what's called a fair market value. And it tends to be between $1,500 and $3,000 euros per day, depending. That's the average. It is very, very important that you go by this. Now, why do I want to say this? You want to make sure that the details of your collaboration are transparent, that it's clearly stated in the contract, that you're modest or appropriate in your choice of hospitality. And the reason is that healthcare providers are also public employees in most cases. And public employees are paid by what? By taxpayers' money. So it means that your company may one day, rightfully so, be under the microscope in terms of how they are approaching the consulting with key opinion leaders, what kind of hospitality that you're doing. It's anti-corruption at the end of the day. It's a good thing. And I believe that the more transparent you are with the doctor who's doing a service for you, the better the relationship is. At the end of the day, it's there to protect both you and the doctor and to ensure an ethical and compliant way of going to market. So you definitely need to manage their expectations. And I want to say from personal experience that every time I've approached a KOL and the KOL is interested in, thinks that they will get rich from working with us, it's not the person, it's not this relationship that they won't be happy, we won't be happy. They need to have a love and a passion for, we can all love money, but they need to have a love and a passion for educating others. That needs to be the central motivation. Otherwise, it's a very, very challenging cooperation. So this is something also that's done by MCI. It's not mine. They have some resources about this. And if Gilad and the team want to say anything else, I think it's great, but do take some time to understand compliance. And as a closing thought, professional education, it takes time to create these partnerships. It can take years to get the right customer on board, but it's really worth it. And I'll say something else. The more unique the product and even the tougher it is, sometimes the better it is for you commercially, because if it's a product that is used, stum, then actually you don't have this long learning curve or long time to develop the relationship with them. So in a way, the tougher the technology, the more opportunity you have to develop that relationship. And it really is, developing relationships with KOLs is a lot about partnership. They also have their goals. They want the exposure. They want to be known. They want to put their name on something as well. And it's a great partnership. It just takes time and a lot of emotional intelligence. Do not be afraid, and tell your sales team, please. I can't tell you how many times I've seen companies in all stages. They're afraid of approaching the doctor who doesn't like them, doesn't like their product, uses a competitor product. You get incredible intelligence from them, and they can very often be your greatest partners in the future. So spend time with them. And that's it. I know I went a little bit over. I want to answer the questions that came up. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Debbie. I can read the questions from the chat. We have a question from Marianne asking when it is appropriate. Asking, can you speak to metrics you've used to measure ROIs and how you've presented this data to the leadership?
It's a good question. So one thing that's important to understand is at which stage the company is. But one thing that you can do before, or let's say after the event, is to create a survey. And everybody needs to fill the survey. So on this, you can ask very simple questions like, how much more confident do you feel with this procedure after? You can do it after the event, directly after the event, 3 months after the event, and 6 months after the event. So you can ask, okay, what was your confidence like with this procedure before the event? What is it like after the event? Have you started using it? Have you, what is your experience with it? So you can survey the practitioner at different stages before and after the event. Does that make sense? Is that clear? Okay.
I think so. The next question from Erez. He's asking, what are the key considerations for medical device companies when adhering strictly to industry standards, like the AdvaMed or MedTech Europe codes, particularly when sponsoring or facilitating professional medical education events?
Okay, so I think this, if I understand well, this is a question about compliance and how you can be compliant with the codes. So first of all, it depends. My considerations, number one, it's that contractually everything is recorded. As I said before, that the fair market value is very carefully decided. Usually you have somebody like a regulatory team who can help you understand what is the fair market value, and that the hospitality payments for dinners, lunches, everything like that will be in accordance to, we can call it appropriate and modest, but you can also find data on what is an allowed value for each different country. So for example, if I'm traveling to the US versus Bosnia, the fair market value is going to be for hospitality is going to be very different for each. Then according to sponsorship of events, I think, if I understand well, it also asked about sponsorship of events. It basically follows the same procedure, like making sure that everything is well documented, that there's contract for all of the work, and that the scope of what you receive and what you pay for is approved by any regulatory body and carefully documented.
Okay, I think do you have any questions about it, Erez? You can unmute yourself if you want. Okay, also we have a question from Ran. Would it be a good strategic move to take a relationship with a KOL to the next level by offering equity for long-term support? Have you seen this work well in practice?
Yeah, this is actually very interesting when it comes to, there's something about this that relates to the previous question. And I like that people are asking about this type of thing. So first of all, you may not always be able to offer them equity or fee for like some commercial benefit. You have to be very careful about that. In some cases you can, and in some cases you can't. My chief medical officer had equity in the company, but he didn't have, let's say, he wasn't a commercial driver, so he was more of on a consultant level. If you can, all of these things need to be disclosed. So when the doctor is going to present in a conference or anytime he does any work on your behalf, it needs to be disclosed, which actually relates to the previous question. Any considerations for medical device companies? Whenever you have a KOL who is presenting on your behalf or doing any work on your behalf, his agreement with you as a company or her agreement needs to be very clear and transparent.
Okay, I think we need to finish because we're past the time, but thank you so much, Debbie, for
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay, if somebody wants to
Thanks,
contact
Debbie.
me on LinkedIn, you're more than welcome.
Thank you, Debbie.
Bye. Thanks.
Okay, bye.